This presentation is for Chapter 2, Job Order Costing. In Learning Objective 6, we are going to learn how to calculate cost of goods manufactured and cost of goods sold. First, we're going to go through and review the journal entries that we have made in this chapter. First, we made an entry to record the purchase of raw materials. That is transaction 1, where we debited raw materials inventory and credited accounts payable. Then, as we began to use those materials in the manufacturing process, we recorded transaction 2. Direct materials were debited to work in process inventory, and indirect materials were debited to manufacturing overhead, and we credited raw materials inventory for the total. Then in transaction 3, we recorded our direct labor as a debit to work in process inventory and our indirect labor as a debit to manufacturing overhead, and we credited wages payable for the total. Then we began to record a series of transactions representing the manufacturing overhead for the factory. In transaction 4, we recorded the depreciation expense on the property used in the manufacturing process. Transaction 5 is for the utilities for the plant. Transaction 6 was for prepaid insurance or insurance expense for the factory, and then transaction 7 was for the property taxes. In transaction 8, we recorded a summary entry for the allocation of manufacturing overhead to work in process using that predetermined overhead allocation rate. And then in transaction 9, we recorded the transfer of the finished goods to finished goods inventory by debiting it and crediting work in process inventory. In transaction 7, we recorded the sales of the goods that were on account by debiting accounts receivable and crediting sales revenue. Transaction 11 was the cost of goods sold entry for those goods that were sold, and we debited cost of goods sold and credited finished goods inventory. We also made an entry in transaction 12 to adjust for the underallocated manufacturing overhead by debiting cost of goods sold and crediting manufacturing overhead. So after we made all of those journal entries, we can see the results in the T accounts. We noticed that raw materials inventory, work in process, and finished goods inventory all still have balances. So those represent either materials that we haven't used yet, jobs that we have not completed, or jobs that we have not yet sold. Those amounts will be shown on the balance sheet. When we look at manufacturing overhead, after we made our entry to adjust for the underallocation, it now has a zero balance. Cost of goods sold, also after having been adjusted, reflects the actual cost of goods sold for the items for this period. In this slide, we see the completed schedule of cost of goods manufactured for Smart Touch Learning for December 31st, 2026. So to calculate cost of goods manufactured, we first start out with our beginning work in process inventory for the year. Then we would add to that our direct materials that were used, direct labor, and then the allocated manufacturing overhead. The total of those three gives us our manufacturing costs that were incurred during the year, and when we add to that our beginning work in process inventory and subtract our ending work in process inventory, we see the cost of goods manufactured, which is $644,600. Now let's look at the calculation of cost of goods sold on Smart Touch Learning's income statement for this year. Cost of goods sold starts out with the beginning finished goods inventory, which in this case was zero. We add to that the cost of goods manufactured that we calculated in the previous slide. The total of those would be cost of goods available for sale, and then we would subtract from that our ending finished goods inventory balance. Then that gives us cost of goods sold before adjustment. If you notice in blue, we have the amount of the under allocated manufacturing overhead adjustment of $15,400. That would be added to that cost of goods sold before adjustment to get the total or actual cost of goods sold amount of $600,000. And the next thing is we want to talk just a little bit about data analytics. So for manufacturing companies, as you can tell, knowing that cost of production is critical for their success. So the job order costing system does accumulate a large amount of data. So data analytics can be helpful to managers in their decision-making process. So knowing something about the environmental impacts that the company is making on the environment can help a manufacturing company to minimize any kinds of fines that they may incur by causing environmental damage. So data analytics can help in ways outside of the job order costing system and also help to protect our environment. And that is the conclusion of the demonstration for Learning Objective 6.